is the most hilariously inaccurate fact someone has told you? Story 1. My roommate tried to convince me that there are chimpanzee people in the jungle because isolated tribes are getting it on with the monkeys. I tried to explain how species reproduce, and quickly realized he thinks you can bang a horse and get a centaur. Story 2. Not me but my mum. She was walking with a group of friends on a popular trail in the UK. She is quite an outspoken friend. Let's call her Sally. The group saw a number of Chinese tourists taking pictures of the sheep along the trail. One of the group asked, "I wonder why they are all taking pictures of sheep all the time." To which Sally replies, "It's because they don't have sheep in China." The group all believed Sally and thought it was an amazing fact. My mum decided to regurgitate the fact one dinner time, saying that Sally had told her, so I called bullshit, so googled it there, and then, turns out China has the largest population of sheep in the entire world. My mum has never lived that down. Story 3. The band name KISS is an acronym for Knights in Satan Service. AC/DC Anti-Christian Devil Children Slayer. Satan laughs as you eternally rot. All told to us without irony by a Sunday school teacher, circa 1987. Story 4. Goats lay eggs. A several-minute argument followed, and I did not convince him he was wrong. I work in meat processing. Not that that's necessary to know that goats don't lay eggs, but it just made the argument all the more ridiculous. I'd literally seen goats born live countless times, and yet he argued. Edit. I also worked at a caviar bar for a while, and many times had to hear from people who were horrified we were eating dolphin eggs, beluga. I've heard that mahi-mahi is dolphin more times than I can count, and from people who've eaten it even. Edit 2 meant whale eggs in the first edit, mahi on the brain. Story 5. The shape of the banana and the way it fits your hand so well are proof that God exists. He stopped using that argument when one of our coworkers pointed out that dicks fit hands pretty well too. Story 6. That masturbating will give you hairy palms. I had a teacher in high school tell us this, and the number of guys and girls who checked their hands immediately was hilarious. I had to really slam on the brain filter to keep from doing it myself, but you better believe I examined my hands thoroughly in the bathroom after class. Story 7. I was talking to a guy at the bar and he was telling me how soap is unnecessary for washing your hands. All you need is a combination of hot water and cold water, not warm, but use both cold and hot. I did not shake his hand. Story 8. This is a story that is too long to type in full, but I once got into a disagreement with some random dude at an AW because he thought that 14 1/4 was more than 13 1/3. His reasoning was that since 14 has a 4 and 13 has a 3, and 4 is 1 unit higher than 3, then 14 is more than 13. The worst part was that in order to prove him wrong I asked the cashier girl which weighed more. She didn't know. Then I asked the next person in line. That idiot said 14. Do you have any idea how infuriating it is to have a complete idiot think that he's smarter than you because everyone in the room is just as dumb as he is? Story 9. My parents tried to convince me that homosexuality is caused by vaccines. Little do they know that I'm gay even though they didn't have me vaccinated as a kid. Story 10. The internet is in the sky. I explained how it's in the ocean. They ganged up on me and said it's called a cloud because it's in the sky. Duh, it was 3 of them versus 1 of me. I walked away losing the debate. There's power in numbers, folks. Edit. Thanks to everyone in the comments explaining how the internet works. To those saying I'm wrong, I maintain, clouds come from oceans. It's science. Story 11. That mind over matter was real, meaning that you could lift objects with your mind, etc. It was a great conversation. Her, you can do all kinds of stuff with your mind. Me, like what? Her, lift things, bend spoons, etc. Me, okay cool, can you bend something for me? Her, well no, my mind isn't that good. Me, then why should I listen to you? Story 12. Catholic school teacher nun explains that raped women can't get pregnant because God wouldn't let that happen, therefore if they did get pregnant, it must have been consensual. Story 13. A woman at a party I was attending over a decade ago insisted that the largest member of the rodent family is the polar bear. I looked at her in absolute disbelief and replied that they weren't rodents, they were bears. She had a PhD too, SMH. Story 14. An ex-boyfriend once insisted that women can hold in their periods like we can hold our urine. He did not believe me, a woman, when I told him that was absolutely not the case. What? Story 15. Someone once told me that it never snows in the state of Washington because it's on the West Coast. Same person also told me that she doesn't believe in gravity because if it was real, wouldn't the sun just up the moon? She was 24 when she said these things to me. Story 16. My dad believes nano silver cures everything, truly believes in his nano silver throat spray. He says kings emperors in the past drank from silver cups, that's how they had long healthy lives. No they didn't, they had mostly short, often disease-riddled lives. Story 17. My friend argued that all eggs are brown when they come out of the chicken, and only turn white after going through a chemical cleaning process. Later he also confidently explained that rats and bunnies can change their gender at will. I know some fish species can do it, but rats and bunnies, no XD. Story 18. That you can live off drinking seawater because Gatorade has sodium in it. I was telling this dude about a guy who was stranded out at sea for a while and survived by drinking rainwater and shark blood or some, and dude was like, why didn't he drink the seawater? Gatorade has sodium in it and it's fine. It's a myth that you can't drink seawater, probably so they can keep charging people for drinking water. Story 19. My grandma wasn't very happy with the fact that I'm vegetarian, so she tried to convince me that fish were vegetables. I still can't help but laugh because she wasn't even joking. Story 21. Neighbor told me he attended an international medical conference for work, and he learned that women were catching diabetes in their feet because of the sandals that they wear in the summer too. Little sister's friend said that a contestant on a singing show like X Factor came second after the finale, because the contestant who won stole his phone and turned it off so he wouldn't get his votes when people texted in. Story 21. Being Jewish in the South. I have heard a lot of interesting takes on my religion. Here are my favorites. Jewish is that where you don't let your food touch, courtesy of a person seeing a rabbi on Dog the Bounty Hunter. I believe you pray to Moses, right? Nope, despite his claim to fame of having been portrayed by Charlton Heston, he was just a man. But you still celebrate Christmas, right? I don't think you understand what Christmas is, so do you have to put salt on all your food? Kosher salt is just a seasoning. My all-time favorite. Hitler didn't really do all that, did he? Seriously, 2-hour conversation with this incredibly stupid person who did not know what the Holocaust was. She also the Titanic was just a movie. Story 22. Astronomer here. It's unfortunately common to hear that Earth is at the perfect distance from the Sun, which is true. We are in what's called the Goldilocks zone, but many people have insisted to me that this distance is so small that if we were 100 miles farther all water would be ice, and if we were 100 miles closer all the water would evaporate. This is often said as proof of a god or similar, because how could we be so lucky? Answer: we're not, because the Earth's Goldilocks zone is many millions of miles wide. Further, we actually change about 4 million miles in distance from the Sun over the course of the year, because the Earth's orbit, like virtually all others, is not a perfect circle. Runner-up, you would be downright depressed. How many people think if an astronaut were to drop a pen on the surface of the moon that the pen would, say, float in place, or fall towards the Earth, instead of falling down to the moon? Story 23. I was embarrassingly old when I realized a local street wasn't named after my granddad. Quick preamble: in Canada, they have small abbreviations in both languages to indicate road, lane, boulevard, etc. So, the sign for Smith Road might say, C.H. Smith R.D., meaning, Chemin Smith Road. Our family name is McCoy and we grew up in a very rural area. Near my home there is a sign indicating, C.H. Coy R.D. My dad casually told me it meant, Charlie Coy Road, after my grandfather. My whole life I've heard people refer to him as, Charlie Coy, although he is called Charles McCoy. I'm even bilingual, you guys. Story 24. A conservative friend showed me a picture of President Obama in front of an ornate curtain at the White House and said it was his Muslim prayer curtain. A. There are pictures of Bush in front of the same curtain. B. There's no such thing as a Muslim prayer curtain. Story 25. Had a friend try to tell me and a group of friends that every single Red Robin was off an exit 3 from a highway. We tried to tell her that no, it was just a coincidence that she saw 2 like that or something. Then when asked, do you know how exits work, she replied, yes, every time there's a Red Robin, they make it an exit 3, WTF. Story 26. Oh my god. I legit just got into an argument with a pal about whether semen dies when it hits the air or not. I don't even want to know how many accidental children he's created at this point. Story 27. That the theory of evolution couldn't be true because if all organisms descended from some single-celled organisms, a human would be able to mate with a chicken. This was a high school biology teacher. Story 28. Physicists couldn't explain how bees can fly. This was only 4 to 5 years ago. We were both fully functioning, voting adults. He honestly believed that scientists were just stumped on bees. Story 29. Hey race mine. And I actually believed it for a little while, probably 7th or 8th grade. A girl in my class informed me that men have a limited amount of in their testes, only about 400 to 500 feet of if you laid it out. Gross, also terrifying for young me just starting to go through puberty. Was too embarrassed to ask my parents, so I didn't find out the truth until I did a little bit of ill-advised Googling. Story 30. My roommate said very confidently at barbecue that meat is a potato. When I asked his reasoning, he told me that the substance-to-protein ratio was very high. Story 31. The reason why you can't find evidence of God on the internet is because Satan is in the wires that connects it and that he blocks the content from reaching your computer. When I laughed, we got into a 2-hour-long argument about how the internet works, which resulted into the end of the relationship. Dodged a bullet there. Story 32. A lady I worked with told me that her husband works as a wildlife preservationist and that he goes into the mountains to keep the gorillas safe from getting shot and that he was currently working to protect the gorilla population in China. I am not even lying. Story 33. Had someone come into a store to buy an air mattress back in HS. She told me that science had proven that springs in the mattress remove energy from your body, and they could show through theme imaging. She also smelled like boiled hot dogs. Story 34. When I was 4, my father told me about his time living in Ohio, and how desert it was. As a small child I associated hyenas and cacti with the desert, and asked him if they had those in Ohio. He proceeded to tell me about how many there were, and I was so wide-eyed and fascinated. He passed when I was 7, and I never really connected the dots that he was bullshitting me until I was 15. Pulled the longest dad joke I've ever heard and wasn't even here for the end of it. Story 35. A classmate of mine tried to tell the teacher that in the slave trade they took the Maya people and brought them to Asia to make them work on the ships. Story 36. A lady told me that if you drink coffee while you are pregnant you will burn the baby, and that's how people got birthmarks. Well, she is in her mid-30s and she truly believed this. Story 37. Had an uncle try to tell me once that he flipped a car of his going under 13 miles per hour just by jerking the wheel. He also tried telling me that dragsters' tires weren't wider to give them better launch grip, and he could post 11-second 14 miles on 6 wide tires. Edits below. It seems some people are arguing that narrow tires provide just as much grip as wider tires. I'm having difficulty wrapping my head around such a notion. If someone could provide an explainer video or link, I'd like to see it. My brain refuses to accept that a narrower tire with a smaller contact patch could provide the same amount of traction as a wider tire of the same material on the faith of a few internet commenters. But I'm willing to learn. Okay, I've heard from some of you and my point stands because my former uncle wasn't smart enough to understand that in order for the tire to get the same traction when narrower it would need to be taller. He was simply parroting a stupid technicality head probably heard from people who think they're clever by making these claims without qualifying them until after the person they say them to express his disbelief. I think everyone understands that the size of the contact patch is what matters, which I completely understood even back then. I was 16 at the time, but most people don't think about the diameter of the tire having as big an impact as the width, which is where this technicality works. So technically, yes, a dragster can have a taller, narrower tire and get the same traction. Story 38. When I was a freshman in high school, we had to do a science fair project for our midterm. There were a handful of girls in the class who were extremely anti-fragrance. Like if someone used strong-smelling shampoo, these girls would freak out and insist on opening the windows. One of these girls did her science fair project on ingredient X. According to her, every single perfume and body spray uses the same exact ingredient X. The manufacturers do not even know what it is, and it is insanely harmful, causes cancer. This girl sprayed bugs with Axe and pink body spray to show the damaging effects of ingredient X on living creatures. Her project was that she sprayed bugs with Axe and they died from ingredient X. Oh, and this presentation was in front of a panel of state judges. Story 39. If you put a band-aid over an ant while it's crawling on you, it'll get absorbed into your skin, fuse with your DNA, and other ants will leave you alone there on 4th because they'll think you're one of them. Story 40. My roommate told me, after he built a snowman during an unexpected cold snap, that it would last a really long time because packed snow takes ages to melt, and a snowman he built lasted from January to August, outside in the South. Story 41. Grits come from trees. Oh yes, it's a big tradition in the South. We get out an old family quilt and go out as a family, put the quilt under the grits tree, and shake it together to collect all the grits. I was a Yankee newly living in Mississippi, so I believed it for a while. Story 42. Went to New York on a band trip in high school. A boy tried to impress me with the fact that the Statue of Liberty is made of gold and they painted it green so people wouldn't steal it. He was also adamant that all the mummies in the Met are elaborate fakes and the real ones are stored in bunkers 5 stories below ground to protect people from ancient diseases. He then thought I would be so impressed by his knowledge I would date him. Not a chance. Story 43. I knew a girl that thought black guns were made out of plastic. Honestly thought all guns that didn't have a shiny metal finish were made out of plastic. I asked her why they kept using metal detectors if they were made out of plastic, and she said they detected bullets. I could not convince her. This was 1994. Story 44. There is a pervasive urban legend in my country region that describes how Neil Armstrong heard the Islamic call to prayer when he walked on the moon. Oh, and there's also the perennial story about Bruce Lee being defeated by a local martial arts master, which eventually led to Lee's death. Story 45. When I was in high school, this dude wore a corn shirt pretty often. One day, one of our teachers who was some old brought him out to the hallway and told him that he can't wear that shirt anymore. She was fully convinced that corn stood for kill or rape NS and made him turn it inside out. Like what? Story 46. My cousin went on a Facebook rant after she got pregnant about how the baby's nervous system is formed at 4 weeks, which means they can feel the pain of abortion. She linked an article to the stages of pregnancy from a mildly reputable site. Her own link refuted her claim. Story 47. When I was about 11, one of the older guys who must have been only 14 but he was older, so authority and all that, told me that because girls don't have a penis, they from their butthole, despite the fact it sounded odd. Even at that age, I couldn't really say he was bullshitting me with any conviction. Story 48. Everything people believe about goldfish. 1. They only grow to the size of their tank. 2. They don't need any kind of filter. 3. They only live a few months. 4. They only have a 3-second memory. All totally untrue. Story 49. There's a Tumblr post about makeup being outlawed in England in 1700 because Parliament thought makeup was a sign of witchcraft. So awfully wrong. 1. Witchcraft had already been declared imaginary and therefore not illegal because something has to be seen as real to be a legal one. This is a period when literally all of Parliament and the entire court would have been in full makeup and powdered wigs. There are plenty of great historical facts, lots of which show women in interesting lights that can now be seen as empowering. We don't need to make this up for internet points. Story 50. My dad said there is an invasive species of catfish in the American South that would fight alligators, walk on land for miles and eat pets and small children. He was deadass. Story 51. It's called a because you blow into it. Rabbits procreate by the male jizzing on the female's face. His reasoning was that once he saw a rabbit jump over another rabbit and while in midair doing so, released a string of rabbit all over the other rabbit's face. The next week he saw bunnies in his yard, clearly the result of a rabbit facial. He repeated this in a zoology class a few years later in 10th grade. Story 52. Most trans people regret their transition. My mom when I was 10, I'm 30 now, have been non-binary the whole time. was too scared to even talk about it forever because of this. Story 53. My former fast food coworkers tried telling me that using gloves while prepping making food spreads more germs than using your bare, washed hands. If that's true, why does every medical professional use gloves? Why do surgeons use gloves? Nobody had an answer. These former coworkers were the same disgusting pigs that refuse to wash the trays your food is put on. It looks clean, I just put a paper liner on it. I'll be fine. We worked across the street from a hospital. I quit from the stress of trying not to kill someone. Story 54. It's not the inaccuracy of the fact that's hilarious. But my 6th grade teacher taught my entire class that pi 3/16, there were some who tried to correct her, and she replied that you can't trust the pi button on your calculator. Story 55. Okay, you'll start by saying that I do not want to start a political argument, but this is a factual story I was told about Trump. It was just so hilariously bullshit and told in a matter-of-fact way that I couldn't let it go. I was with my dad, brothers, and a bunch of their friends at deer camp. Ever since the 2016 election, someone always eventually brings up the fact that I voted for Hillary despite the camp code no politics, no religion. Then they all pile on. One of these guys solemnly leaned back in his chair and stared into the fire. Let me tell you something about Donald Trump, he said. I was pretty worked up at this point, not because I'm a big Hillary fan, I'm not, but because I despise Trump. Me go for it. Him back in the 90s, Trump and his wife had a flat tire on their limo. Me, laughing, this is already a super relatable story. Him, shut up. Hold on, me, don't tell me he changed it himself. Him, fuck off and hold on, no he didn't. Me, of course he didn't. Him anyway. This guy pulls over and helps the chauffeur change it. As he's walking back to his car, the window rolls down and it's Donald Trump. Trump says, hey, I want to thank you. Can you leave your address so I can send you something? And the guy says okay. Couple weeks later, the guy finds out that Trump paid off his mortgage. That's what kind of person he is. End scene. I honestly had no response, I was so dumbfounded. I won't get into the actual facts of Trump's history of cheapness and even stealing from charities. But this story is so unbelievably bullshit, I couldn't believe it was told to me in such a I'm gonna put you in your place fashion. And you know the biggest reason I know it's bullshit? Because I've never heard Donald himself mention it. Even if you're a supporter, you have to admit, if he did something that kind for someone without anything in return, do you really think he would stay quiet about it? Of course not. He would bring it up at every opportunity, just like he does with every other tiny positive thing he does. This was a couple years ago, but for good measure before writing this I looked it up, and it turns out it's a story that Snopes has reported as false as well, and apparently it's been circulating for years. Story 56. This girl in my science class seriously tried to argue to our class that meteors were spaceships that turtles came to Earth on. She was completely serious. Story 57. I'm sure it's been posted, but my brother told me that if you're dealing drugs and ask if the person you're selling to is a cop, and they're actually a cop, then they can't lie. I thought he was joking. He was not. I had to explain how being undercover works for a police officer. Story 58. Years ago, my sister and I got into a huge fight because I told her Texas Chainsaw Massacre was not a true story. Rather, it was inspired by the lives and actions of several well-known serial killers. Most notably, Ed Gein, though technically not a serial killer for his disturbing use of human body parts as skin and furniture. Generally, I don't expect people to be weird true crime buffs like me, but she insisted that it was not only real but that she had been to the house where it had happened. I tried to explain that was impossible considering she had never been to Minnesota and Gein's house was torn down. She told me I was an idiot. Story 59. My old boss told me once that the date was 101112 and that date configuration won't happen again for another 10,000 years. There's something similar going around Facebook at the moment that goes something like, if you take the year 2020 and subtract your age, it gives you the year you were born. Try it. This only happens once every 40 years. I have seen it shared sincerely by relatives who are just shocked at this weird fact. It doesn't take into account whether you have already had a birthday this year, so I've seen comments like, it was a year off my actual birth year, but it's still pretty freaky. Story 60. In California, whilst looking at Catalina Island, I overheard someone say it's high tide today, so the island must be closer. This dude thought islands are out there just floating around with the tide. Story 61. When I was around in the 1st or 2nd grade, me and the boys were talking at the lunch table, and one of my friends said that if you took your shoes off and put just one of them on, that like half of your body would be taller than the other, and then you could see your brains and stuff. Legit scared me until the 5th grade. Story 62. I'm a teacher, and a kid once wrote an information report on soccer, which informed me that soccer was invented at the same time as women. I queried this and we went back and found his source, which said women's soccer started at the same time as men's. I'm not even sure if that's true. We had a little lesson in being careful when you copy things down from the internet after that. Story 63. That blondes actually were dumber scientifically, because the sun can penetrate the scalp easier, thus, allowing the intelligence to evaporate at a faster rate. We were in high school. Story 64. If anyone who knows me sees this, I'm basically doxing myself, but a friend bet money that Japan isn't a country, it's an island. He was convinced those were contradictory statements. This was in a prestigious high school. Story 65. When I was young, my dad told me straws give you brain damage. He really just didn't want to use straws, but decided that was too boring. We concocted a whole pseudo-scientific explanation for why straws cause brain damage that's obviously complete bullshit, but sounded legit. I've told people this for years and have gotten good enough that a lot of them believe it. Occasionally someone will tell me something along the lines of, Hey man, I was talking to someone about that straw brain damage thing, and they say you're lying, so I guess I might be the source for some people's inaccurate facts. Story 66. I work in a juvenile prison in a very rural area. It's a high-security prison, but most of the fencing is 3-foot-high barbed wire. I could explain all about that, but the only relevancy it has to this story is that it keeps the cows out from neighboring pastors. When we get new intakes into our facility, we tell the kids the cows guard the campus and that they have been trained to trample them if they run. Most of the kids are from bigger cities and actually believe it for quite a while. Story 67. That unregulated firearms save millions of lives every year in America. And no, that CDC report which you did not read does not actually say that. I know this because I actually read it. Story 68. My senior year English teacher said that hens only lay fertile eggs when they hear a rooster. Luckily we were in the computer room, so I naturally look up the wiki for chickens. I put the whole section of reproduction onto a Word document. Printed out should mention that it was crunch time and everyone was printing their finales. But this was important to me. I walk over to the teacher station, while she's on Facebook to show kids her granddaughter's presents and I nicely ask for a highlighter. I highlight the line about cloacal kissing, and plop it on the desk. Relax. I made sure to clear it before, we had a good laugh. Couldn't tell if she was impressed or taken aback. Luckily it was her last year teaching, which showed. Story 69. No, that's not true. The Catholic Church broke off from the Protestants, she said, eyes glazed over and looking as if her world had just been upended. Honey, my coworker replies. I used to be a nun, I would know. That girl is absolutely insane, even writes notes in her Bible all the time. Even though I'm pretty sure that's not supposed to be allowed. Story 70. Don't know if this counts, but once my mom tried to explain what anime is. She has never watched an anime ever. She said it was an art style she had seen on Facebook. Story 71. My sort of know-it-all brother-in-law tries to talk psychology in front of me sometimes, which I have a master's in. He says stuff with confidence that I know is total bullshit. A friend asked about personality disorders. Before I could respond, he jumps in with facts like they're really a spectrum. We're all on them to some degree. It only matters when it gets to where there's a stigma about it. I just shook my head. I didn't have the energy to argue that day. Story 72. My aunt tried to convince me that you can cure depression by meditating and putting up walls around your depressing thoughts. She also thought that vegetables expired after only a few days, so she was constantly throwing away perfectly good food because she thought it would make her sick. I have many more stories about this woman. She's a nut job. I legitimately have no idea why my uncle married her. Story 73. Vaccines are the white Western world trying to kill off black people. Cholesterol tablets cause gingivitis. A raw vegan diet, daily Pilates and yoga will cure my back problems. If I cut my hair short, my husband will leave me and no man will think I'm attractive because they'll think I'm a lesbian. Story 74. Was playing Rocket League and noticed a guy had a profile pic of an older Nissan Z. The headlights were on, so I couldn't tell if it was a 240Z or 260Z. I was pretty sure it wasn't a 280, so I asked, 240 or 260. They just asked what, so I said Z. After a goal I explained my guess and they asked if I was talking about their profile pic. I said yeah, and they said it was a Nissan Datsun. Story 75. A health professor at my very religious, very white university said that black people jump higher because they have bigger butts. It felt stupid just to type that. Story 76. Anime is for kids. That the 3/5 compromise was actually the first example of civil rights for African Americans, because it at least gave some voting power to their masters. Yeah. Story 77. I had a friend call Ebonics Ubonics. Pronounced just like that. I was like, no, Ebonics like ebony, black, you know. She told me that was racist and mockingly laughed at me. It doesn't sound that serious, but this was before Google, so it felt so good to prove her wrong. My AP calculus partner used meese in a sentence. No laugh, straight-faced. When I called her on it, she tried to reason with. But what about goose and geese? It's the same as moose and meese. Story 78. Already posted here, but my aunt once told me that humans and dinosaurs live together and suggested that I go to the Christian Science Museum to educate myself. A girl at my high school said that when you eat licorice, the fat you gain from it goes to your. And my aunt once told me that the Republicans are somehow chosen by God and that failing to vote for a Republican is a sin. And yes, she did live in Texas for a long time. Story 79. Back in kindergarten, my friend tried to convince me that the basket with his stuff in it had his full name written on the sticker. Dude, there were only 5 letters there. Story 80. You get twins by boning twice on the same day. I mean, coincidentally, yes, that's how it happened for us, but it's not a rule based on scientific fact. Story 81. A former coworker once claimed that a cost of living raise caused her to lose money because it moved to her a higher tax bracket. Multiple people tried to explain her how marginal tax rates work and that even if you did pay more taxes you still earned more net income. She wouldn't budge. She wasn't very bright. Story 82. I saw this kid. He must have been about 14 or 15 and he was wearing an old Spider adapter for 45 record on a string around his neck. I haven't seen one in years, so I just said, hey, that's cool, and he proceeded to tell me that it was an ancient rune symbol and it protected him from evil. I told him that it used to be put into the middle of a record to make it fit the record player spindle, and then I realized he probably doesn't even know what a record is, and I just sounded like an old for the first time. I gave up and accepted his fervent belief in the ancient runic symbol around his neck. Story 83. That nipples are regenerative, as in you could cut your nipple off, and a nipple would grow back like a lizard tail. I graduated magna laude with bachelor's in biology, so I could have explained scientifically that our nipples don't work that way. But a lot of people refuse to believe science these days, so I told him the story of my childhood friend instead. He was doing dumb on a bike without a shirt, wiped out and literally had his nipple scraped off by concrete. 20 years later he still only has one nipple. Story 84. Nazis were socialists. Why? Because the state seized the means of production and controlled it. Yes, the state, the opposite of the people, seized the means of the production. Because there was only one person, a dictator. The Nazi Socialist Party was a grifting move, it was a sham. I'm still cringing from hearing someone actually claim in real life with a straight fact that the Nazi Party were legitimate socialists in any way, when it was a freaking dictatorship that massacred its people. How does that make any sense? He seriously behaved like it was just common, accepted knowledge, and I now know who he's watching on YouTube. I mean, if they weren't socialist why would they put it in their name? That would be lying, and Nazis wouldn't lie, that's illegal. Of course, all of the policies associated with socialism that he listed that Hitler implemented can be equally implemented in a capitalist society or a monarchy, etc. A society could be a freaking utopia and amazing because its king is just the most awesome king and all of his policies are exactly what a socialist would choose. Guess what? It's still a monarchy and not socialist. It's not about the decisions, as much as it's about who makes the decisions and how. Like, wow, Hitler also cared about animals. That definitely makes up for taking away all power and agency from the German people. Classic socialist, am I right? Oh. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to ask him why Nazis always consistently vote conservative. Yes, there are still Nazis. Where are all the out and proud Nazis campaigning for Bernie? It's weird. Because if you actually look online, they are all campaigning for the GOP. God, the cringe. Edit to add, yes, this was actually my ex. I can't describe how far my attraction to him plummeted after witnessing his genuine defense of such ridiculous nonsense. Story 85. An ex of mine insisted that if you visualized anything, it would happen. She insisted she just had to visualize receiving lots of money and it would happen. When I pushed to get more info, she doubled down and said that, if I believed, I could stick my hand in boiling water and not get scalded. To her, all of this was fact, and if you failed, it only meant that you didn't truly believe in what you had visualized. That was an interesting relationship for sure. She also didn't believe in evolution and was deeply insulted when I implied that humans evolved from primates.